Donald Trump has a Vladimir Putin problem again, and this time it is not some side scandal buried in a committee hearing or some old question about private loyalty. This time it is happening right in the middle of a live international crisis, right in the middle of a war environment, right in the middle of a moment when American troops, American credibility, and global markets are all tied together. Because now you have reporting that Russia was giving Iran intelligence that could help target U.S. assets, and then on top of that, reporting that Moscow floated a proposal to ease off that support if Washington backed away from Ukraine. And if you are watching this and thinking that sounds like blackmail dressed up as diplomacy, that is because that is exactly what it sounds like. And before we go any further, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what you think, because this is one of those stories where everything gets buried under noise on purpose. The headlines come fast, the spin comes even faster, and if you do not slow it down for 1 second and look at what is really being said, you can miss just how dangerous this actually is. Here's the thing. A normal White House would hear something like this and respond with total clarity. If a foreign adversary is helping another hostile power identify American positions, there would be a red line. If that same adversary then tried to use that conduct as leverage to extract concessions somewhere else, there would be a flat rejection and a public warning. Clean, direct, immediate. But with Trump, it never works that way, does it? With Trump, there is always this fog. There is always this murky zone where the United States is supposed to act like extortion is just another negotiation. There is always this strange delay where the obvious answer gets smothered beneath theatrics, ego, and side deals. And that is the core of this whole story. Putin does not have to fully trust Trump to test him. He just has to know Trump well enough to understand the opening. Offer him something that sounds transactional. Offer him something that lets him pretend he is the one making a grand bargain. Offer him something that flatters his view of the world, where every alliance is conditional, every commitment is for sale, every principle is negotiable, and every conflict can be converted into a personal deal. That is the trap. And the reason it is so dangerous is because Trump has spent years teaching the world that this is exactly how he thinks. Now watch how the pattern snaps into place. Reports emerge that Russia has been giving Iran information that could help it threaten U.S. forces and assets in the region. Then separate reporting says Moscow floated the idea of stopping that support if the United States cut off assistance tied to Ukraine. Then you look up and Trump is raging at NATO again, attacking allies again, insulting the very countries the United States is supposed to rely on in a broader crisis. While the markets are already reacting to the war and energy fears are surging. That is not a side detail. That is the whole picture. The pressure is not moving toward the actual aggressors. The pressure keeps getting redirected toward America's allies and America's own commitments. And it comes back to this. Every time Trump faces a geopolitical test, he finds a way to weaken the side he is supposedly leading. Every single time. He does not steady the alliance structure. He attacks it. He does not remove uncertainty. He multiplies it. He does not isolate the hostile actors. He opens space for them. So now, in the middle of a crisis involving Iran, Russia sees a chance to drive a wedge into the heart of Western strategy. And Trump's instinct is not to close ranks. His instinct is to keep punching sideways. That is why this is bigger than one report or one negotiation or one meeting. Because even where details are disputed, the strategic direction is already visible. Reuters reported the allegations about Russian intelligence support to Iran earlier this month, and later reporting described the claim that Moscow proposed curbing that support in exchange for reduced U.S. backing for Ukraine, while the Kremlin denied the arrangement. What matters here is not just whether every private phrase landed exactly as reported. What matters is that Russia is operating like it believes Trump can be maneuvered, and the rest of the world is watching that in real time. And that's where it gets worse, because this is not happening during some quiet diplomatic season. This is happening while the Strait of Hormuz is at the center of a global energy scare, while oil prices are spiking, while U.S. allies are trying to avoid being dragged deeper into the conflict, And while Trump is publicly lashing out at NATO for refusing to follow his lead, Reuters and AP both reported his attacks on NATO allies over their reluctance to help with the Iran operation and the Strait of Hormuz crisis. So ask yourself what that looks like from Moscow. You have a White House already fighting with its allies, already straining the coalition, already acting like alliance management is an insult. Of course, Putin sees leverage there. Of course he does. Because once Trump starts talking that way, once he starts calling allies weak or cowardly or useless, he is doing half of Putin's work for him. He is telling Europe that the American commitment is shaky. He is telling Ukraine that support can be traded. He is telling adversaries that the West can be split through pressure, flattery, and deal making. And he is telling the American public to view alliance breakdown not as a warning sign, but as proof of his toughness. That is the trick. He takes deterioration and sells it as strength. He takes isolation and sells it as independence. He takes strategic vulnerability and sells it as leverage. Now watch this part carefully. The people around Trump will always say he is just being unpredictable, that this is all part of some larger game, that he likes to keep other leaders guessing. But there is a difference between unpredictability and manipulability. There is a difference between throwing opponents off balance and showing them exactly which buttons to press. When Russia reportedly says, in effect, maybe we can help you in the Middle East if you give us what we want in Ukraine, that is not them being confused by Trump. That is them reading him. And it comes back again to the same core point. This presidency keeps turning American power into a bargaining chip for other countries to exploit. Ukraine's support becomes negotiable. NATO unity becomes negotiable. Sanctions pressure becomes negotiable. Even the safety of American troops starts floating inside this swamp of ambiguity and denial and side-channel politics. That should horrify people across the political spectrum. This should not be partisan. This should be basic. You do not allow a hostile power to suggest that help against attacks on Americans can be exchanged for strategic concessions somewhere else. You shut that down so hard that nobody tries it again. But that clean line is exactly what Trump struggles to provide, because he is drawn to the performance of negotiation, even when the substance is rotten. He likes the feeling of the deal too much. He likes the pose too much. He likes the idea that only he can juggle all these competing forces. Only he can talk to the strongmen. Only he can bend the world through personal instinct. And that is how you end up in these absurd, dangerous moments where America looks less like the anchor of an alliance system and more like the object of a global tug-of-war. Meanwhile, the economic side is not waiting politely in the background. Oil has surged as the war and Hormuz crisis have intensified, and that means inflation fears, fuel costs, freight costs, airline costs, shipping costs, and the broader pressure that hits ordinary people first. Reuters and AP have both reported the jump in oil prices and the market anxiety tied to the conflict. So while Trump is out there throwing rhetorical fire at NATO and turning every strategic question into a macho test, the real-world consequence is simple. Americans pay, families pay, small businesses pay, workers pay, and the administration still wants to sell this as proof of control. Control? What part of this looks controlled? A Russia-Iran intelligence controversy, a proposed geopolitical swap involving Ukraine, public feuds with NATO, a widening Middle East crisis, oil spikes, market nerves, and a White House that still sounds like it is making up the script in public as it goes. That is not control. That is drift with attitude. That is improvisation with global consequences. That is a presidency treating connected crises like episodes in a reality show instead of the kind of compound emergency that can get people killed and alliances broken. And this is the trap for the country. The public gets conditioned to absorb each piece separately. One day it is Russia, one day it is Iran, one day it is Ukraine, one day it is NATO, one day it is oil, one day it is inflation, one day it is troops, but they are not separate. They are all part of the same stress test. Can the United States still act like a coherent power under a president who treats loyalty as personal, treats alliances as optional, and treats every crisis as another chance to improvise a bargain? That is the question underneath all of this. Not whether Trump can post something aggressive, not whether some senator can go on television and say the president is keeping his options open, not whether some spokesperson can muddy the language for another news cycle. The real question is whether the structure around American power can survive a leader whose instincts keep aligning with the leverage games of adversaries instead of the stability needs of allies. And it comes back one more time to Putin, because Putin does not need to win every exchange. He does not need to get every concession. He just needs the West to become less certain, less unified, less disciplined. He just needs the American president to keep turning common purpose into conditionality. He just needs one more crack in trust, one more moment where Europe wonders whether Washington can still be counted on, one more moment where Ukraine looks more tradable, one more moment where the alliance spends its energy managing Trump instead of confronting the actual threats. That is how you weaken a rival without firing a shot at it directly. So when you hear this story, do not hear some distant foreign policy chess move that only experts should care about. Hear the warning in plain English. A hostile power was reportedly tied to helping Iran target U.S. interests. A proposal was reportedly floated to trade that off against Ukraine's support. The Kremlin denied parts of it. The White House remains wrapped in ambiguity. Trump keeps attacking allies anyway, oil keeps rising, the region keeps getting hotter, and the same man who promised strength is once again showing the world how easily disorder can be mistaken for dominance. That is why this matters, because if you can be pressured like this in public, imagine what your adversaries think they can do in private. If your alliances look this disposable under stress, imagine what message that sends before the next crisis. And if your answer to every warning sign is more bluster, more scapegoating, and more attacks on the very allies who help contain global chaos, then sooner or later the bill comes due. Subscribe right now if you have not already, turn on notifications and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and what you think, because this story is not just about one outrageous report or one reckless presidency. It is about whether the United States is being pushed, flattered, and manipulated into giving away its own leverage while pretending that is what strength looks like.